At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Chikondi. Let's begin. Cadet Ziv and Cadet Lotho had just finished their daily training at their local branch of the Galactic Military Academy when, as usual, they decided to stop at the bar for their species' equivalent of alcohol and perhaps meet someone interesting to talk to. Someone other than the old alien soldier who always sat alone at the counter. The establishment's automatic doors slid open as the two cadets entered, their bodies still experiencing the pleasant ache of a day spent in combat simulations and physical conditioning. Ziv's furred bipedal form moved through the entrance, his digitigrade legs carrying him smoothly across the worn metal flooring. His lean frame, covered in short yellow fur that seemed even warmer than usual under the bar's amber lighting, gave him an appearance of softness that belied the modest muscle hidden beneath all that fluff. In standard gravity, he had no trouble maintaining his balance or poise, his species having evolved on a world remarkably similar to the Academy's environmental settings. Beside him, Lotho's gelatinous and flexible shape undulated forward in that peculiar rolling motion characteristic of his kind. The translucent red blob shifted and reformed with each movement, his malleable body adapting to every slight irregularity in the floor. Where Ziv walked, Lotho flowed, and together they made an odd but familiar pair, their friendship having been forged through countless training exercises and late-night study sessions. They approached the counter, and claiming their seats proved no challenge for either of them, though the process differed considerably. Ziv simply hopped onto one of the elevated stools, his tail curling around the seat's support for added stability, his posture immediately relaxed and comfortable. Lotho, lacking any skeletal structure whatsoever, had to compensate by spreading his lower mass across the seat while extending his upper portions and arms over the counter's surface, using the solid structure to maintain his upright position. It was a position Ziv had seen his friend adopt hundreds of times before, and Lotho managed it with the ease of a lifetime of practice. Once settled, Ziv allowed himself a moment to take in his surroundings, his large eyes scanning the interior of their usual haunt. The bar was surprisingly empty for this hour. Normally, the place would be filling up with cadets fresh from the academy, all seeking to decompress after another demanding day of training. The walls, decorated with holographic images of various words and star systems, cast their gentle glow across mostly vacant tables and empty chairs. The atmospheric generators worked as usual, their noise a constant presence in the background, maintaining the precise mixture of gases that allowed such diverse species to gather in one location. Besides the waiter, a tall insectoid being who stood polishing glasses at the far end of the counter, there was only one other patron. The old alien sat hunched over his drink several seats down from where Ziv and Lotho had chosen to settle. His pale green skin had the faded, weathered quality that came with advanced age, and his long ears drooped as if they too had grown tired over the years. No fur, hair, or any other covering adorned his head, leaving the network of fine wrinkles clearly visible even from this distance. Ziv turned to Lotho, his whiskers moving as he prepared to voice his disappointment. "Well," he said, his voice vaguely hinting the faint purring undertone common to his species, "it seems we have to be happy with each other's company today." Lotho's eyes, those remarkable organs that could move freely within his translucent membrane, swiveled to survey the room for himself. They floated through his gelatinous form like small fish in a Red Sea, taking in the empty tables, the solitary waiter, and the old alien nursing his drink. When the eyes settled back into what passed for Lotho's face, there was something like relief in their positioning. "At least there are no humans here today," Lotho said, his voice emanating from somewhere deep within his form, the vibrations traveling through his gel-like body before emerging as sound. "Those brutal primates scare me, Ziv. Last time I saw one here, I turned my back at the door and forget about my drinking habit for a day." The mere mention of humans caused an involuntary reaction in Ziv. His yellow fur bristled, the hairs standing just a bit more upright as a primordial response to perceived danger rippled through his nervous system. He felt his ears flatten against his skull for just a moment before he consciously forced himself to relax.
"Those brutal humans scare me a little too,"
Ziv admitted, his clawed fingers drumming lightly on the counter's surface.
"But I never forgot my drinking habit because of one of them. I just took a seat as far as possible from wherever they were sitting. They scare me too much to enjoy anything in their presence,"
Lotho said, his entire form shuddering at the memory.
"Have you seen their teeth? And those eyes, both of them facing forward like some kind of predator, which I suppose they are."
Ziv nodded his agreement, feeling a kinship with his friend's fear. He had never had a direct confrontation with a human, but the stories were enough. Tales of their brutality in combat, their aggressive expansion into contested territories, their willingness to fight to the death over matters of principle or pride. They were a species that seemed to thrive on conflict, that had crawled their way up from some death world in the spiral arm to become one of the galaxy's most formidable military powers. Their very presence was followed by an elusive aura of violence, or so it seemed to Ziv. He was about to raise his paw to summon the waiter to order their usual drinks and try to salvage what remained of their evening, when a voice from beside them cut through the ambient noise of the bar.
"I thought humans were brutal too,"
the old alien said, simply turning on his stool to face them.
"Until one of them spared my life."
Ziv's head snapped to the side, his eyes widening in surprise. Lotho's form rippled with the suddenness of the interruption, his eyes spinning within his membrane to focus on the speaker. The old alien looked at them with an expression that was difficult to read on his unfamiliar features, but there was something in his eyes, something that looked like wisdom, or perhaps weariness, or maybe both. Up close, the old alien looked even more ancient than he had from a distance. His pale green skin was marked with scars, some faded to nearly invisible lines, others still carrying a darker tint that suggested deeper wounds long healed. His long ears, which hung down almost to his narrow shoulders, had notches and tears along their edges, the kind of damage that told tales of a violent past. He wore a simple civilian tunic, but there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested a military past, a certain straightness to his spine despite his age.
"Are you out of your mind?"
Lotho asked, his voice hinting a note of concern that transcended species.
"Have you had too many drinks, old-timer?"
Ziv leaned forward, studying the old alien's face for signs of intoxication or dementia.
"With all due respect, Elder, that doesn't make any sense. Humans don't spare lives. They're brutal. Everyone knows that."
The old alien laughed, a sound like wind chimes mixed with gravel, his weathered features creasing into even deeper lines of amusement.
"No, I know what everyone thinks," he said, "and I'm neither drunk nor mad, young ones. But tell you what, let me pay for your drinks, and you have the patience to listen to an old story. Fair trade?"
Ziv and Lotho turned to look at each other, a long look passing between them. Despite being from completely different species, they had spent enough time together to develop a form of unspoken communication. Ziv's ears quickly moved upward, his version of a raised eyebrow. Lotho's left eye swirled in a slow circle, his equivalent of a shrug. Free drinks were free drinks, and what harm could come from listening to an old veteran tell stories? Even if the story was unbelievable, it might at least be entertaining. The old alien caught sight of their silent exchange and laughed again, his long ears swaying with the motion.
"You'd better order your drinks before I change my mind,"
he said, signaling to the waiter with an exaggerated gesture. The insectoid waiter approached fast, his compound eyes glittering in the low light. Ziv ordered his usual, a fermented grain beverage from his homeworld, served cold with a twist of something that approximated citrus. Lotho requested his preferred drink, a nutrient-rich suspension that would be absorbed directly through his membrane, delivered in a wide, shallow bowl. Moments of silence settled over the trio as the waiter prepared their orders. Ziv found himself studying the old alien more closely, trying to guess his species. The long ears and hairless green skin narrowed it down, but there were several possibilities. The lack of any visible cranial ridge suggested he wasn't Keltorian. The nostril configuration ruled out Phyrexians. Perhaps Xanthari? They were known for their longevity and their tendency toward military service. The waiter returned with their drinks, placing them with enough care on the counter. Ziv's beverage came in a frosted glass, condensation already beading on the outside. Lotho's bowl was set before him, and he immediately extended a portion of his mass over it, beginning the slow process of absorption.
"Well,"
Lotho said, his voice slightly muffled by his drinking posture,
"we've got our drinks. Tell us the story about a human sparing your life. We're listening."
The old alien took a sip of his own drink, something dark and viscous that clung to the sides of his glass, and smiled.
"So eager," he said. "The youth of today have no patience, no sense of proper storytelling."
He paused, then relented with another chuckle.
"Very well. My name is Latib, and long ago I was a cadet just like the two of you." "How do you know we're cadets?"
Ziv asked, his ears perking forward in an obvious display of curiosity. Latib just laughed, waving a thin hand dismissively.
"No, I know. Believe me, I know."
He didn't elaborate, instead taking another drink and settling himself more comfortably on his stool.
"But that's not important. What's important is that the first time I met the humans in battle, I wasn't a cadet anymore. I was a fighter craft pilot, a lieutenant in my species' defense force, and I was fighting for my people over a distant colony where both my species and humanity claimed ownership." "Wait,"
Lotho interrupted, his eyes swirling with confusion.
"Is this story about a human sparing you, or about humans defeating your species in battle and you fleeing with your tail between your legs?" "My species has no tail," Latib said dryly. "And stop being so impatient. Drink, I'll get there."
Ziv and Lotho exchanged another look, this one carrying a trace of amusement despite themselves. There was something compelling about the old alien's manner, a confidence that came from lived experience. Ziv lifted his glass and took a long drink, the cold liquid sending a pleasant chill down his throat. Beside him, Lotho continued his absorption, his color deepening just a bit as the nutrients entered his system. Latib watched them drink, then nodded, apparently satisfied, before continuing.
"The battle for that colony had become brutal,"
he said, his voice taking on a different quality, something harder and more distant, as if he were seeing things that existed only in memory.
"Neither species had been able to establish a proper ground base. The surface installations kept getting destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed again. So most of the fighting happened in the sky, in space, in the thin upper atmosphere. Day after day of dogfights and bomber runs, neither side willing to surrender, both sides convinced that one more push would break the enemy's will."
Ziv found himself leaning forward, drawn in despite his skepticism. Lotho had ceased his drinking, his full attention focused on Latib.
"One morning I was deployed with my squadron,"
Latib continued, his voice taking on the clipped rhythm of someone recalling a distant past.
"Standard patrol pattern, or what passed for standard in those days. The pre-flight checks, the launch sequence, everything felt routine. We were barely 10 minutes into our route when we got the alert. Human fighters had been detected, coming in fast from the outer marker. I remember my heart hammering in my chest, my hands suddenly slick inside my gloves. We scrambled to intercept, and within minutes we were engaged. The first volley of fire lit up my tactical display like a festival. Then the real chaos began.
He paused, his long fingers tracing the rim of his glass, leaving faint trails in the condensation.
You have to understand, both our technologies were roughly equivalent. We had slight advantages in maneuverability. They had slight advantages in shield capacity. It made for battles that could turn on a single mistake, a moment's hesitation, one lucky shot. That day, the battle was fierce. Fighters spinning and diving, energy weapons cutting through the black, explosions blooming like deadly flowers against the stars. I could hear my squadron leader shouting coordinates, hear the warning klaxons as missiles locked onto my tail. The G-forces pressed me into my seat as I pulled hard turns, my vision tunneling at the edges.
Ziv could picture it in his mind, having run countless simulations of space combat. The chaos, the speed, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death.
Somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, a human pilot and I ended up scattered from the main battle,
Latib said, his voice dropping lower.
Both our fighters were damaged and smoking, trailing vapor and sparks like dying comets. Warning lights blazed across my console. Hull breach, engine failure, life support compromised. But neither of us was ready to accept surrender. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness. We kept at it, chasing each other through the lower atmosphere, then over the mountains, trading shots that grew more desperate with each pass. My targeting systems were failing, his shields were flickering, each trying to get that final kill that would justify all the damage we'd already taken. Neither of us willing to be the one who broke off first.
He took another drink, and Ziv noticed the old alien's hand trembling a little, not from age or infirmity, but from the memory of fear.
It was then, after a final confrontation, one last exchange of fire where we both scored hits, that we found ourselves falling toward the planet's surface. My engines were gone, completely dead, just silence where there should have been the reassuring roar of thrust. His were sputtering, coughing like a dying animal. The altimeter numbers were spinning down faster than I could process. We were both headed down into a massive forest region, both of us riding our fighters like bombs toward the ground. I tried the emergency thrusters. Nothing. Tried to angle for a clearing. Impossible. The ground rushed up to meet me, green and merciless, and I thought I would die.
Lotho swallowed hard, the motion rippling through his entire form. Ziv realized he had been holding his breath and consciously forced himself to breathe normally. Latib finished his drink in a single gulp, the motion sudden and almost violent, then turned to them with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes.
And then I crashed.
He went silent after saying that.
Wait! You can't stop there!
Lotho said, his voice rising in pitch.
What happened next?
That would be rude, Ziv added, surprising himself with how much he wanted to know the end of the story.
You have to finish.
Latib laughed, the sound genuine this time, and signaled to the waiter for another drink.
See? Now you understand storytelling. Let the moment breathe. Let the anticipation build.
The waiter brought another glass of that dark, viscous liquid, and Latib had barely taken possession of it before he was continuing, unable to hold back despite his words about patience.
The crash was worse than I'd imagined, he said, his voice dropping lower. My fighter came down through the canopy, branches tearing at the hull, then hit the ground and tumbled. I was strapped in, of course, but the restraints can only do so much. I felt ribs break, felt my shoulder dislocate, felt something in my leg snap. When the fighter finally stopped moving, it was on its side, half buried in the soil, and I could smell fuel leaking, could see sparks from damaged systems. I knew I needed to get out, but I couldn't move. Couldn't make my body respond properly. I thought I would die right there, either from my injuries or when the fighter's power core finally gave up and exploded.
He paused to take a fresh sip of his drink, and Ziv noticed that even the waiter had stopped his constant polishing and was listening intently.
It was then that the human arrived.
The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp.
He was hurt too. I could see that immediately. One arm hung at an odd angle, and there was blood, that distinctive red human blood, running down the side of his face from a gash above his eye. But he was in better shape than me, mobile, functional, and he was holding a pistol, a military-issue sidearm, pointed right at my cockpit.
Ziv and Lotho exchanged a look, both of them imagining the scene. The smoking wreckage, the injured alien, the human standing there with a weapon.
I couldn't even move to defend myself, Latib said. Could barely turn my head to look at him properly. Through the cracked canopy, I could see him approaching, and I thought, this is it. This is how I die. Shot like vermin while helpless in my own crashed fighter.
The bar was completely silent now, except for Latib's voice and the weak noise of the atmospheric processors.
But then the human did something I didn't expect. He stood there for a long moment, pistol trained on me. Then he lowered it. He holstered the weapon, walked right up to my fighter, and said, in perfectly accented trade standard, mind you, "I guess this counts as my win."
"What?" Ziv said, his ears standing fully erect in surprise.
"He didn't kill you?"
Lotho's eyes were spinning rapidly, a sign of extreme confusion.
"He didn't kill me,"
Latib confirmed.
"Instead, he pried open my canopy with a piece of debris, then pulled me out of the wreckage. And let me tell you, it hurt. Every movement was agony. But he was careful as he could be under the circumstances. He dragged me away from my fighter, getting me to a safe distance just before the power core failed and the whole thing went up in flames."
He paused, letting them absorb this information.
When we were far enough away, sitting against a fallen log with the heat of my burning fighter warming our backs, I asked him. I said, "Why am I still alive?" My translator had survived the crash, so we could understand each other in any language. And you know what that crazy bastard said?
Ziv and Lotho shook their heads, completely absorbed in the story.
He said, "We're pilots. We fight in the sky with our crafts, not cold-blooded killings on the ground."
"That doesn't make any sense,"
Lotho said immediately.
"You were enemies. You'd just been trying to kill each other."
"I know,"
Latib said, nodding.
"That's exactly what I told him. And he just shrugged, that particular human gesture, and said something about honor, about the difference between combat and execution. He said when we were in our fighters, we were weapons, extensions of our craft. But on the ground, injured, helpless, that was different. That wasn't war anymore. That was just murder."
Ziv felt something shifting in his understanding, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit but was trying to find its place.
"At night," Latib continued, "the human recovered both emergency kits from our crashed ships, mine and his, which had come down about a kilometer away. He helped me set up my emergency shelter, even though every movement clearly pained him. We couldn't exactly be friends, you understand. We were still enemies, technically. But we weren't fighting anymore, either."
He took another sip of his drink, and Ziv noticed his eyes had gone distant, looking at something far beyond the walls of the bar.
As darkness fell and we sat in the shelter of my emergency tent, he took out this weird human data pad. Their technology is so different from ours, but it works just as well. And he showed me something called YouTube videos from an ancient channel. The screen was cracked, but the audio worked fine.
Latib smiled, the expression genuine and touched with nostalgia.
I still remember the voice of the narrator in the middle of one of those videos saying, "Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and you'll get a cookie." I had no idea what a cookie was or what liking the video meant in that context, but the human laughed. I found myself laughing too, despite everything. Despite the pain, despite our situation, despite the absurdity of it all.
"But how did you survive?" Ziv asked, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. "How did you get rescued?"
"The humans' rescue arrived first," Latib said. "His people had better tracking technology, or maybe they were just closer. When his team came down in their transport, they didn't take me with them. I didn't expect them to. But they didn't shoot me either. And that human, before he left, he gave me a communicator, food packets, and water. He set it all within my reach, since I couldn't move well. Then he looked at me and said, 'Stay alive until your people come. I want to think that sparing you meant something.'"
He paused, swirling the liquid in his glass.
"I was rescued hours later by my own forces. They came in expecting to find either a corpse or nothing at all. Our fighters don't usually leave much when they crash. When they found me alive, with a human communicator and human supplies, they were completely baffled. Suspicious, even. They questioned me extensively, thinking perhaps I had betrayed my people, made some kind of deal with the enemy."
"But you told them the truth?"
Lotho asked.
"I told them the truth,"
Latib confirmed.
"though I don't think they truly believed me. How could they? It went against everything we'd been taught about humans, everything we thought we knew about their brutality and their ruthlessness in war."
Ziv sat back on his stool, his mind working through everything he'd heard. His entire life, he'd been raised on stories of human aggression, human violence, human willingness to destroy anything that stood in their way. And here was this old veteran telling him a story that contradicted all of that. Or did it? The humans had still been fighting that war after all. They hadn't spared Latib out of weakness or pacifism. The pilot had made a choice, a personal choice about honor and the difference between combat and execution.
"Why are you telling us this?"
Lotho asked, his voice conveying a note of suspicion now that the immediate grip of the story had loosened.
"What's your point?"
Latib turned to look at them both, his ancient eyes moving from Ziv's face to Lotho's gelatinous form.
"I overheard you when you came in," he said simply, "talking about how those brutal humans scare you. About how they scare you so much that you can't even share a public space with them, can't even stay in the same bar. And I felt like I had to fix that. Had to at least try."
He took another drink, his long ears moving up and down.
"You see, I never met that human again after that battle. I looked for him years later when the war finally ended and the colony dispute was settled through diplomacy instead of destruction. I searched through records, tried to find his name, his unit, anything, but I never could. Maybe he didn't survive the rest of the war. Maybe he just didn't want to be found. I'll never know."
Latib's expression softened, and there was something almost gentle in his weathered features.
"But I met several other humans in the following years. Once I understood that they were beings capable of both mercy and violence, just like us, just like every species that's evolved under a sun and crawled its way into space. Once I understood that, I was able to see them differently, to talk to them, to learn about them, to befriend a few of them."
He finished his drink in a single gulp, setting the glass down with a decisive clink.
"Hell, some of my best friends are humans now, and that war for the colonies, it's a matter of the past. The colony is jointly administered now, both species living and working together. The thing we thought was worth dying for turned out to be something we could share after all."
Latib reached into his tunic and pulled out a payment chip, placing it on the counter. He tapped it against the reader, and Ziv saw the transaction complete, enough to cover not just his own drinks, but theirs as well, with a generous tip for the waiter besides. The old alien stood, his movements slow but steady, and he reached out to gently tap both of them on their shoulders, Ziv's furred one and the upper portion of Lotho's gelatinous mass.
"You should allow yourselves to be open to friendship with humans," he said quietly. "Or at the very least, be willing to talk to them in a bar, to share space with them without fear. They're not monsters. Perhaps they are very competent killers, but they are not fundamentally more violent than we are. They're just people, trying to survive and find meaning in this vast, cold universe, same as the rest of us."
Latib moved toward the door with the careful steps of someone who had learned to accommodate an old injury, his long ears swaying with each movement. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at them one final time.
"That's all I had to say," he said. "The rest is up to you."
And then he was gone, the door hissing shut behind him, leaving Ziv and Lotho sitting at the counter in silence. They looked at each other, then down at their drinks, then at the empty stool where Latib had been sitting. Ziv felt something stirring in his chest, some emotion he couldn't quite name. It wasn't that his fear of humans had vanished completely. Fear instilled over a lifetime didn't disappear because of one story. But it had been joined by something else now. Curiosity, maybe, or doubt about his certainty. Or maybe just the smallest opening of possibility that what he'd been taught might not be the complete truth. He took another drink, the liquid now warm in his glass, and thought about fighter pilots falling through alien skies, about emergency kits shared between enemies, about videos watched in the darkness of a strange world. He thought about choices made in the moment when killing would have been easier than mercy.
"Do you think it's true?"
Lotho asked quietly, breaking the silence. Ziv considered the question carefully.
"I think he believed it was true," he said finally, "and I think that might be enough."
They sat in silence for a while longer, finishing their drinks slowly, each lost in their own thoughts. The waiter returned to his polishing, the soft clicking of his movements a familiar comfort. The bar remained empty except for the three of them, but somehow it felt less lonely than it had when they'd first arrived. Tomorrow they would return to the academy. They would continue their training, learning about tactics and weapons, about the various species that populated the galaxy and the conflicts that divided them. They would practice in simulators and study battle histories, preparing for a future where they might be called upon to fight. But tonight, Ziv found himself wondering if he ever met a human in battle, if circumstances ever brought him face to face with one of those beings he'd been taught to fear. What choice would he make? Would he see only an enemy? Or would he remember an old veteran in a bar telling a story about mercy shown when mercy wasn't required? He didn't know the answer, but for the first time he was asking the question. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was what Latib had wanted, not to erase their fear entirely, but to add complexity to their understanding, to plant a seed of doubt about their certainties. Ziv finished his drink and stood, Lotho flowing down from his stool beside him. They made their way to the door together, two young cadets heading back to their barracks, their minds full of stories and questions and possibilities they hadn't considered before. As they stepped out into the night, Ziv glanced back at the bar one final time. Through the window, he could see the waiter still polishing glasses, the empty stools at the counter, the glow of the holographic star systems on the walls. And he thought about a human pilot falling from the sky, making a choice that would echo through the years and eventually reach two young cadets in a half-empty bar. A choice that said there was something more important than the immediate demands of war, something that transcended species and conflict.